These are the lecture notes for Chapter 14 on Gregor Mendel and heredity. What you're looking at here is a photograph of the flowers of a garden pea plant. Garden peas have two flower varieties as far as the color of the flower. The flower color can be purple or white. Gregor Mendel did his studies on heredity using garden peas, but we can still apply what he learned to human heredity, at least to some. It applies to some of our traits, the ones that are inherited by simple dominance, which we'll talk about what that means. But basically, the reason we can apply the rules of heredity that were developed from garden pea heredity, we can apply that to humans because both the garden peas and humans have sperm and egg. And in both situations, there's half of the DNA from one parent is found in the sperm and half is found in the egg. So the inheritance of traits is at least for the traits that are inherited by simple dominance. It is the same in garden pea plants and humans and other animals. So what we're looking at here is an illustration showing you, even though Gregor Mendel studied more traits than just flower color, this is showing you the genetics cross that he performed with pure purple flower and pure white flower. And what I mean by pure or true breeding is that the original purple flower, the original parent plant, which had purple flowers, it was pure for the trait of purple color because it would never ever produce anything other than purple flowered offspring. And for the white, it was the same way. The white flowers never produce anything other than white flowered offspring. So what we're looking at here is that Gregor Mendel learned that each parent has two alleles or versions, two genes for each trait. One allele came from its parent, its father, and one came from the mother. In other words, one came from the sperm, one came from the egg. Same thing over here. One of these alleles came from the sperm, one came from the egg. That made this white flowered plant and then this purple flowered plant. So they have two alleles for each trait, but they're only going to give one of those to their offspring through their sperm or egg. Okay? So every parent has two alleles for each trait and gives only one of those alleles to their offspring. And then the offspring are produced by fertilization, and during fertilization, each offspring is going to get two copies or two alleles for each trait, one coming from the sperm and one coming from the egg. So this is what Gregor Mendel discovered through his experiments. So he is given credit for discovering the law of segregation and the law of independent assortment. Now, there were reasons why he chose garden peas rather than humans. The advantages of using garden peas is garden peas have a short generation time. In other words, it doesn't take very long for a garden pea, once pollen lands on the female part of the flower, and then the sperm travels down a pollen tube to the egg, and then fertilizes the egg. It's a short time before the seeds are produced, and then the seeds are planted and germinate and grow into new plants. And we can record the traits, of the offspring. So that a short generation time means it doesn't take long to produce new offspring garden pea plants. And you're not going to just get one or two offspring. You're going to get large numbers, thousands, hundreds and thousands at the time. You can also, with garden peas, you can control mating. It would be really hard to get two humans to mate for the purpose of discovering what the baby is going to look like. Just for the purpose of discovering what the baby will look like, that has been crossed between these two individuals. You may get some individuals to agree to that for a certain amount of money. But with garden peas, you don't have to spend a whole lot of money, and you can control which garden peas are crossed with which garden pea plants. By what you can do is you can either allow the garden peas to self-pollinate, and that way they are crossing with each other, or you can cross-pollinate the garden pea plants. In other words, you can take a paintbrush, remove the pollen from the male part of the flower, and then apply the pollen to the female part of the flower that you want to cross it with. And this is a picture of kind of what that looks like. If you want to cross this purple flower with this white flower, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to take scissors and remove the pollen, the male parts of the flower from the purple flower. So the egg is going to come from the purple flower. We remove the male parts so that no pollen accidentally gets transferred from this flower to itself, because flowers have male and female parts in the same flower, at least garden pea flowers do. Then you're going to take the stamens, which are the male parts from the white flower, take a paintbrush and brush the tips to get the pollen off, and then apply the pollen to the female part of the purple flower. And that is how you cross-pollinate the white flower with the purple flower. Now, Gregor Mendel picked the only traits that he studied were the traits that had two distinct alternative forms. In other words, only two versions of the trait, or two alleles for the trait. The two alleles for flower color would be purple and white. Okay, so he only used true breeding varieties with the parents. The original parent plants were true breeding. The parent that was a purple flower that had purple flowers was true breeding for purple flowers, and the one for white was true breeding for white flowers. So Mendel crossed or mated two contrasting true breeding varieties. One was white, one was purple, and you call this hybridization. A hybrid is just a cross between two distinct varieties. The true breeding parents, the true breeding purple, true breeding white, are called the P generation. The hybrid offspring, when we cross those two true breeding parents, are called the F1 generation. And then Gregor Mendel took those F1 individuals, those hybrid offspring, and crossed them with each other. And that gave him the F2 generation. So back in the 1800s, before Gregor Mendel discovered the law of segregation and the law of independent assortment, it was generally assumed that traits were inherited by the blending hypothesis, that the traits from the parents would result in a blend in the offspring. Now, we know just from looking at offspring and looking at their parents that can't be true. It definitely can't be true all of the time. And it's hardly ever true that children are just an absolute, halfway in between blend between the traits of their two parents, because sometimes children have traits those parents don't show, that they maybe show traits that came from a grandparent. Sometimes children show traits from one parent and not the other one. So it's not a blend, you know. So anyway, we know that, and Gregor Mendel proved how traits really are inherited. When he crossed the P generation, the true breeding purple with the true breeding white, he got all purple flowers in the offspring. So the hybrids were all purple. When he crossed them, he got 75% purple and 25% white. So what that tells us is that the white flower trait is hidden in the purple flowered offspring, but they must be carriers of the white flower trait, or else they couldn't produce offspring that have white flowers. So the way we found out that this works is the original purple flower parent donates a purple gene or purple allele, big P, and the white flower donates a white allele or little p. And all of the offspring end up with, this is a video. You can watch the video. I'm sorry. The video is slide 13. And then all of the offspring would have one purple allele and one white allele. So purple must be dominant to white. So if you have a purple allele and a white allele, then the purple is the dominant trait. So purple is the trait that will be expressed. And the white flower color is the recessive trait. And the only way to express a recessive trait is if you have both alleles for that trait. So the way you're going to be, and if you're a garden pea, the way your flowers are going to be purple is if you have two purple alleles or two big P's, or else one purple allele and one white allele. That would be big P, little p. That's the only way you're going to be purple. To be white, you have to have two white alleles. Okay, so these are the results from Gregor Mendel's crosses. These are the results when he crossed the F1s, or the hybrid individuals. And so what he got with flower color is he got about 3-to-1 purple to white. With seed color, he got about 3-to-1 yellow to green seed. Seed shape, he got about 3-to-1 round to wrinkled. So all the traits you're seeing here on the left are the dominant traits, and the ones on the right are the recessive traits. So we do know that alternative versions of a gene are called alleles. So the gene for a trait, however many versions it has, those versions are called alleles. So the alleles for flower color, the gene would be for flower color. The alleles would be purple or white. And this is just showing you that a gene is a piece of DNA, a sequence of DNA that codes for a protein. And in this case, the protein is going to be responsible for the purple versus the white, the purple pigment versus the white pigment. It's not really white pigment. White would be absence of pigment. But in flower color, we now know that the gene that controls purple flowers, the purple color, actually codes for an enzyme that helps synthesize the purple pigment. And in the white flowers, that enzyme is absent. So they don't have a pigment. They are lacking pigment. That makes them white. All right, so we know allele is the word that means a version of a gene. A dominant allele is the allele that is going to mask the recessive allele. If you inherit the alleles for both traits, you're going to express the dominant allele. So you have to inherit two recessive alleles to express that recessive allele. The law of segregation, discovered by Gregor Mendel, says that the two alleles for a trait separate or segregate during the formation of gametes, or egg and sperm. So the two alleles for a trait, heritable character or a trait, separate or segregate during gamete formation. So the egg or the sperm gets only one of the two alleles. And then the egg and the sperm give one allele to the offspring, and the offspring will end up with two alleles for the trait, one that came from the sperm, one that came from the egg. So the way that we can see a visual that shows us the different combinations of sperm and egg, we can use a Punnett square. In the Punnett square, a capital letter, or I say big letter, a big letter represents the dominant allele, and a little letter or lowercase letter represents the recessive allele. So we use a big P for purple, since purple is dominant, a little p for white, since white is recessive. And when we work a Punnett square to show the cross between the hybrid F1 generation purple flowers, we're going to put the alleles for the parents outside the boxes of the Punnett square. Since both parents have one big P and one little p, we'll do big P, little p outside of the columns, and big P, little p outside of the rows. And then we will show in the boxes the combinations that meet. So two big P's, big P, little p, big P, little p, little p, little p. So 3 out of the 4 possibilities are going to be purple flowers, and 1 out of the 4 possibilities would be white flower. So this doesn't show us what the offspring will be. It shows us what they can be, and it shows us the percent chance of getting purple flowers versus white flowers. So it's a 75% chance the offspring will have purple flowers and a 25% that they'll have white flowers. So for example, if you were to produce 100 seeds from these two hybrid purple flowered parents, big P, little p, if you produce 100 seeds, it would be expected that 75 of them would grow into purple flowered plants and 25 of them would grow into white flowered plants. Although in reality, it would probably not be that perfect. It might be a 75% chance that they're purple, but you might end up getting 70 or 80 or some number other than 75. Now, we also need to learn the terms homozygous and heterozygous. If an individual is homozygous for a trait, then both alleles for that trait are the same. So, 2 big P's or 2 little p's would be homozygous. But heterozygous means the individual has 1 dominant and 1 recessive allele, or 2 different alleles for that trait. So big P, little p would be heterozygous. And so the genotype is the actual alleles. So if it's purple flower, its genotype can be big P, or big P, little p. Okay? The genotype is the actual alleles, big P, or big P, little p. The phenotype is the physical appearance or the expression of the genotype. So the phenotype for big P, or big P, little p is the same. The phenotype is purple. But if the genotype was little p, the phenotype would be white. So here's all the possible genotypes and their matching phenotype. So if you have big P for the genotype, your phenotype is purple. Big P, little p for the genotype, your phenotype is purple. Little p, your phenotype is white. And then make sure you understand that 2 little p's is homozygous, 2 big P's is homozygous, but big P, little p is heterozygous. And I will stop here and start back the rest of the recording, or the next recording will start back at slide 28.